Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. I hope everyone's enjoying their summer. I know I'm pretty excited to see some fireworks on the 4th. And I'm also really excited to bring you this game featuring all new commanders from The Lord of the Rings. These were really sweet to brew, and I hope you guys really enjoy. Also, as a reminder, this is the last week for the giveaway as it also ends on the 4th. So definitely check it out.
Also, have you heard the news? Your favorite CDH YouTube channel has released some cool merch. And if you're interested in picking up some sweet new apparel, come check us out. Also, if you like what you see, consider joining our Patreon, as with your help, we can keep producing the videos you enjoy. And if you want to play with us, hop on our Discord. We have an ever-growing community that loves to talk MTG or whatever else strikes our fancy. And we would love to meet new people. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. Starting us off is the Papa Squats on Aragorn the Uniter. And for some longtime viewers, you might recognize the name, as I've played a few of his lists on the channel. But today he's brewed a 4-color food chain list. Although this isn't a turbo deck, but a stax one. He realizes he can flood the board with stax creatures and then use Aragorn as a strong attacker until he actually grabs food chain and then can sack all of his stax creatures to allow him to combo off. In the next spot, we have Hidden Planet X on Smeagol, Helpful Guide. I actually wanted to build this commander after seeing Mons' video, but this is a Golgari mill strategy. It plays a lot of either reanimation or graveyard hate to prevent our opponents from abusing Smeagol's ability, while using the ability ourselves to ramp and as an alternate win condition, along with a Tainted Pact on a Stolen Thrasios. In the third spot, we have Teddy playing Sauron, the Lidless Eye. This is a Rakdos World Gorger strategy that utilizes an aggressive steal and sack strategy to slow his opponents down if he can't combo off immediately. And while it didn't come up this game, the active treatment is actually pretty good, especially when the dreaded Orcish Bowmaster really starts going off and amassing a massive army. And bringing up the rear is one of our Patreon supporters, Ghost Dealers. Today he's also brought Sauron, but this time it's Sauron the Dark Lord. And while this is a 6-mana commander, the deck is a straight Turbo-Nos strategy, with a hyper low curve to accelerate out either an Adnos or his commander. He can draw a lot of cards, and then win with either Thassa's or Underworld Breach. And if either strategy doesn't fit, the Orc army he amasses grows pretty rapidly. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. The Papa Squat starts off the game with a Mana Confluence and takes 1 to cast the Birds of Paradise. Hidden also has a Mana Confluence and casts a Mana Crypt. He ends his turn casting a Sylvan Library.
I know it's pretty early on for me to stop already, but I actually had a few different plays that I was debating for my first turn. I only had 1 land in hand, so I was really lacking on the color requirements. I had an Elvish Mystic and was debating playing that, and even spicier, I was holding an Opposition Agent as well, and was wondering if I should hold it and try and snipe a fetch land for an early land drop as well. But ultimately I decided the Sylvan is probably the safer play, and that's what I went for.
Teddy plays an Urza's Saga and casts a Mox Diamond. He discards the Marsh Flats and then taps the Mox for a Voldaren Epicure, who on ETB pings the table and gets Teddy a blood token. I do think he does get a little too carried away as he cracks the blood to discard a World Gorger Dragon to draw a fresh new card.
Ooh. Whoa!
I've
2018 called. They want their card back.
And then
That's aggressive.
Steelers, on the other hand, has a much simpler turn, as he plays and cracks a Polluted Delta to grab a Badlands.
I will untap, upkeep, and draw. I'm going to play a City of Brass, because I am a masochist. Going to take 2 damage.
He then spends his 3 mana on a Rhystic Study. Hidden is safe from his grip and Sylvans. I'm going to Sylvan. That is not good.
That's Sylvan's a trap.
I was hoping for a land, I did not find one.
Unfortunate.
Hidden actually has to pass, and the table really hopes there's no Animate Dead coming out from Teddy. Teddy draws and gets another counter on his Saga. He plays a Cabal Pit as land and has to pass. with Steeler casting an Entomb on his end step. He gives a card to Papa, and in response, Hidden flashes in an opposition agent. The Papa Squats gets another card from the Ristic, and the Oppo agent resolves.
Yes.
Aggressive.
Middle Misstep, Oak Island, Toxic Deluge, Reanimate, Odorara, and Force Negation.
Oh yeah, that was 100% Villainous Reanimate. Got
That
it.
You don't know what it was. You don't know what
That's 100% what that was.
I was thinking of Dockside.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, I had no clue what I was supposed to get here. I did debate looking at Thassa's for maybe a sneaky win later in the game, but since I wasn't holding my Tainted Pact, I didn't think it was a good idea. Additionally, I was thinking about Dockside, but it only generated 3 treasures, and with a nice little boost, I don't think it would have helped me in the long game. I also probably should have just grabbed a fetch land. I settled for a command tower since I was looking for the colors, but I think a fetch land for the shuffle would have been the better play.
Steeler plays a Volcanic Island and passes. Papa Squats plays an island as land for turn, and for 3 casts an Archon of Emeria.
So that Archon actually is really hurting me right now. I'm holding like 2 or 3 different elves at this moment, and I just can't deploy them fast enough, unfortunately. I also don't have any removal for it, so this really hoses me, although no one at the table knew that at that point.
Hidden untaps and is saved from his crypt. He takes 4 from his Sylvan and plays his stolen command tower, which enters tap. Hidden is still very worried about the World Gorger and casts a Deathrite Shaman. He's limited to 1 spell a turn, so he pays for the Ristic. Teddy untaps, draws, and has to sacrifice his Urza Saga to search. Hidden is happy to take control of his search, and nabs a Soul Ring. Although again with the Archon, this is really hampering me. Teddy is really not having a good time either, as he plays a Verdant Catacombs as land, and ends his turn with a Talisman of Indulgence, giving a card to Papa. Steeler plays an island and just passes. The Papa Squats plays the Gemstone Caverns and casts his commander Aragorn. He then heads to combat and sends the Archon at Teddy for 2. Hidden takes 3 from his grip and Sylvans. He takes another 4 for an extra card and has a tapped Woodland Cemetery. He then casts a Mind Crank and pays for the Ristic. Hidden decides he should exile the World Gorger now with his Deathrite, as he hands the turn over after that. Teddy has a tapped Seer Step Pathway, and for his 1 spell for turn is an opposition agent. He does though have to give a card to Papa Squats. Steeler untaps and decides it's now time for the Deluge. He actually wants to mill himself and puts 10 into the X cost. But with the mill trigger on the stack, Papa Squats casts a Force of Negation, exiling Lavinia from his hand to do so. The Toxic is exiled and Steeler's mills 10. And ends his turn with a tapped Otawaro. Papa Squats shocks in a Sacred Foundry and mills 2. Then for 2, he casts a Dockside. He triggers Aragorn to bolt Hidden and gains himself 5 treasures. Combat is then held with Aragorn going at Teddy, who takes the hit and mills 5 more. Hidden is safe from his crypt and Sylvans. He finds 2 tutors on the top and decides to not keep any extra cards. Smeagol then comes out and Hidden pays for the Ristic. Teddy plays a tapped Wooded Foothills as land and casts a Ragavan. He pays for the Ristic and passes. Steeler has a tapped Phyrexian Tower and casts a Reanimate, targeting the Phantasmal Image. Steeler pays for the Ristic and responding to the Reanimate, Papa Squats casts a Fierce Guardianship, triggering Aragorn to scry 2 and countering the Reanimate. Papa starts off his turn cracking 4 treasures on a Shalai, Voice of Plenty. This triggers Aragorn for a 1/1 and he then heads to combat. The Archon heads at Teddy, while Aragorn heads at Steeler. There are no blocks and players mill their cards. With Hidden at Papa's end step activating his Deathrite to exile Ragavan, netting him 1 life out of the deal. Hidden is safe from his grip and Sylvans. He still has 2 tutors on top and doesn't take any extras. He then casts Gollum, Secretive Plotter, and passes after that. Teddy untaps and casts a Toxic Deluge, where X equals 6. He mills 6 from the Mind Crank and pays for the Ristic. With the Toxic still on the stack though, Papa Squats does float a white off his birds, while Hidden exiles a Brain Freeze out of Stealer's graveyard to ping the table for 2 and mill even more cards. The Deluge then resolves and Hidden gets tempted by Golem's Leaves trigger. Then, with the battlefield being clear, Teddy cracks one of his fetch lands. He does need to mill one, but in response to the crack, Papa Squats flashes in an Archivist of Ogma, with Teddy cracking his other fetch in response, milling another card. The Papa Squats does get a draw, and Teddy ends up finding a Badlands, and a tap Blood Crypt, passing after that. Steelers has a Morphic Pool as land, and for 6 casts his commander Sauron the Dark Lord. He gives a card to Squats, and hands the turn over. The Papa Squats plays an Exotic Orchard and casts a Faber Elder. This triggers Sauron for an arming, and the Papa Squats then ends his turn with combat, sending the Archivist at Hidden for 2. Hidden is safe from his Crypt and Sylvans. He still doesn't like what he sees and starts off casting a Stolen Soul Ring. He pays the Rhystic and Stealer amasses again. Then for 3, Hidden casts a Compost. He pays for Rhystic and the army grows. Hidden then ends his turn with an Elves of Deep Shadows, paying for the Rhystic. Teddy untaps and just passes.
Sounds like an 18 life Adnaz.
That's what it sounds like to me. That would be funny.
Yeah, it would.
He just goes Chromox, Mana Crypt, Mox Opal. Okay.
Stealer on his turn casts a Burning Inquiry. He pays the Rhystic and everyone draws and randomly discards 3 cards, with the notable hits being a discarded Squee and a Dundane Ranger. Only 1 black card is discarded and Hidden gets 1 draw from his compost. Stealer then heads to combat and sends Sauron at Papa with the 4/4 army heading at Teddy. There are no blocks, and before damage, the Papa Squats cast a Soul Partition on the army to prevent Stealer from drawing a new hand. Squats does have to mill one though from his City of Brass being tapped, but the army does get exiled. Papa Squats then takes the hit and mills even more cards, with Stealer on his second main casting an Imperial Seal. I do not have any
That seems.
responses.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Fuck.
Well, yeah, sure. Do you pay for Rhystic Study?
Fuck. I forgot about that stupid ass Minecraft.
Stealer doesn't pay for the Rhystic and triggers the Archivist and Compost. Stealer ends up milling a Villas, giving another card to Hidden. The Papa Squats shocks in a Breeding Pool. He mills 2 and spends most of his available mana recasting his commander, Aragorn. A Ragavan then comes out, with Stealer taking 3 from the Aragorn trigger, milling again, and this time hitting a Thassa's Oracle. Combat is then held, and the Archivist goes at Teddy for 2. Teddy mills a Shieldred, and Hidden draws off his compost. Hidden is safe from his Crypt and Sylvans. He doesn't keep any extras and plays a Bayou as land.
I would love to tell you it's tapped, but I can't.
What do I want to do?
That was so long ago.
That was the same game. This game's
Yep.
super wild.
Yes, it is.
The game's always even itself out. You got a quick game and then you got this.
Yep.
Well, I guess I'll...
2 Toxic Deluges.
Hidden then casts a Necromancy.
Okay, so I did really debate holding that Necromancy because it can be used at flash speed, but I was really hoping Sauron was out of answers at this point, and with only the Faber up, I was hoping the Papa Squats didn't have anything either. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to go for it then.
The Necromancy targets the Thassas, and Hidden pays for the Rhystic. Unfortunately, Steelers responds with the Force of Negation, giving a card to the Papa Squats. The Necromancy is exiled, and Hidden then follows it up with the Demonic Tutor, giving a card to the Papa Squats, who this time responds with an Haven Mind Sensor.
God damn it. That's not the interaction I wanted. You have anything else, you're in 4 colors, and that's what you choose?
Yeah.
It's
I'll
like
keep a
opposition
blue
agents.
floating, I guess. Or a white yeah, we'll keep a blue floating.
The Aven triggers Aragorn for a 1/1, and Hidden looks at the top 4 of his library. Unfortunately, he does not find a reanimate, as he puts the card into his hand. Unfortunately, there is a little mistake, as I do play a second land by accident, as I play a Phyrexian Tower and cast the Llanowar Elves, paying for the Rhystic.
My turn already?
You did it. It's a 12 life adnons.
I thought I had it.
You were
So
close. You're so close.
Teddy untaps and is not sure what his out is in this situation. He plays a City of Brass's land and Vamp Tutors. He pays for the Rhystic and is just hoping to find something in the top 4. He does trigger the Archivist and Compost, and that's when the table reminds him he loses 2 from the Vamp and will also need to mill 2 as well, as he mills a Gamble and a Necropotence, letting Hidden draw another off the Compost. Stealer starts off by sacrificing his army to his Phyrexian Tower for double black, and uses it on an Animate Dead targeting Villas. He doesn't pay for the Rhystic, and the Animate Dead resolves. Luckily for the table, he's limited on his available black mana, as he activates Villas to pay 2 life to mill 2, draw 2, and give Ragavan -1/-1. A Chromox then comes out, and Stealer gives him another card. He imprints a Final Fortune and activates Villas again, this time killing off the Aven. Unfortunately for Stealer, all he drew were mana rocks, as he casts a Mana Crypt, paying for the Rhystic, and a Soul Ring, still paying the tax. He then heads to combat and sends Sauron at Teddy for 7, who drops to 3 and mills 7, with Hidden getting to draw 2 from his Compost. The Papa Squats plays Savannah as land and starts off swordsing the Villas. Stealer does get an Orc army, but the Villas is exiled, and Hidden gets to draw off his Compost. Papa then taps out to cast a Rocco, where X equals 7. This triggers Aragorn to deal 3 damage to Teddy, caning him a 1/1 and pumps up Aragorn. Rocco then resolves and he grabs out an Elish Norn to wipe the board and pump his team up. He then heads to combat and sends 15 damage at Stealer, who mills 15 cards as well. Hidden does get to draw 3 off the Compost, and his end step casts an Entune, hoping to get a shuffle and bidding a Bloodghast to his yard. Hidden untaps and takes 3 from his Crypt and Sylvans. I know I'm dead from the Elish Norn and decide to take 8 from the Sylvan. I then play a Snow-Covered Forest's land and think I have a play worked out, as I cast a Culling Ritual. And here's another fun interaction. Due to my Compost and Sauron army, every spell I cast will get me a draw. So with the Amass and Rhystic trigger on the stack, I respond with a Vampiric Tutor. This puts another Amass and Rhystic trigger on the stack. Stealer does have a response though, as he flashes in a Dual-Caster Mage. He pays for the Rhystic, and while the Mage does die to the Elish Norn, its ETB will still trigger. Stealer does debate on whether or not to copy the Vamp or the Culling Ritual, and ultimately decides to copy the Ritual.
I got way too greedy for that. I didn't realize how much I needed that Compost, and I was hoping for maybe just a counter spell, but that really stopped me. I should have just played anything else, since all I needed was that Vamp Tutor. But I guess that's just how it goes. I was holding a Praetor's Grasp, so I really did want the extra mana as a backup win con, but I really didn't need it, and I got punished hard for that.
The copied Culling Ritual then resolves, with Stealer making a bunch of black mana. Then the Amass happens, but without the Compost, Hidden doesn't get to draw. Then the Vamp resolves, and I don't have any way to draw, so I grab an Animate Dead and hope I just don't die to the Papa Squats on its turn. Then another useless Amass trigger happens, and finally the original Culling Ritual goes off, not doing much now, with Hidden having to pass after that. Stealer untaps, and while he does have a win in hand, the Elish Norn actually stops him from casting his Orcish Bowmaster. So he decides to fire off his Wheel of Fortune anyways. He gives a card to Papa Squats, and everyone discards their hand and draws 7. Unfortunately for Stealers, his new hand isn't any better, as he casts a Wishclaw Talisman. He activates it to tutor, but doesn't have a way of surviving, and has to pass. The Papa Squats then heads to his turn and casts a Sardian Avenger. This triggers Aragorn to bolt Stealer, and with Papa following it up with a jet mirror to trigger Aragorn to bolt, buff, and create another creature. And with that, the table scoops it up. Hidden was holding a removal spell for the Elish, but with jet mirror, it still just wouldn't be enough.
And before we get onto the game review, I want to thank a special Patreon supporter, Josh Schutt, for his continued support of the channel. Game review. Well, that was a great game. I know it was a bit of a long one, but I thought there was a lot of different interesting play patterns and lines, since it wasn't just a fast win from one of the commanders. And I really enjoyed playing it, even if both my win attempts did get stopped. Although, I wasn't the only one who got stopped. Teddy, unfortunately, got a little too overzealous with the discard of the World Gorger Dagon. It really would have been sweet if he could have untapped and cast a Necromancy, but he did not draw anything, and with it being exiled, it really hurt him a lot, and he wasn't really able to recover. As for other win attempts, Sauron actually had a potential few, but I ended up milling most of them, and surprisingly enough, he wasn't able to recover from that. I know decks really want to use their graveyard, and ultimately he was able to mill the Villas off my effect, but he just didn't have the black mana needed to keep going Villas. And as for Aragorn, I think he did a really great job policing the board state and really punishing us with those attacks. I didn't realize how good those multicolored creatures could be when he's getting multiple triggers off a single spell. But thanks to everyone that played, and as a reminder, I'm a community ambassador for Monarch Media, and they're partnering with LotusCon this year to create an incredible CDH tournament event. So if you're interested, I'll have the link down below for more information. And thanks for making it to the end. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.